A Shaw TV Public Affairs presentation.
Instead of dealing with each other on issues that they actually control, mayors and councillors spend all their time whining about the provincial government and lobbying ministers. Isn't it time just to get rid of that and make it a UBCM convention that truly focuses on municipal issues?
Good evening and welcome to Voice of BC. I'm Vaughn Palmer, and the friendly folks from the Union of BC Municipalities are all in the provincial capital this week, just having a great time and schmoozing, and people are raising all kinds of issues. And you can tell Paul Ramsey, who complained off the top as a former provincial finance minister because he probably spent most of his time saying no to mayors and councillors when he was in government. Welcome to the show tonight to talk about all local issues. Frank Leonard, the mayor of Sannich, welcome to the show. Thanks for being back.
Good to be here.
And Greg Moore, the mayor of Port Coquitlam. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, a good UBCM convention, almost over here on Thursday. What was the big issue this week, Frank Leonard?
Most of the talk is about finances, money. You know, the economy is soft. People are trying to figure out how to pay for things, and mayors and councillors are trying to figure out how to pay for infrastructure. So a lot of talk about infrastructure. It's not very sexy, but pipes and roads and bridges are important to us. So I would say in terms of the issue that carried on through every day was about financing infrastructure, and then of course each day there's always something that's quite topical.
The thing that I noticed too, Mayor Moore, is that the federal money, the big plan that came up during the fiscal crisis, the money's starting to run out. So everybody's looking, is there going to be a new plan?
Yeah, so that stimulus funding actually ran out a while ago. It had to be spent within a certain time to stimulate the economy. So they're now planning for Canadian Infrastructure 2014 plan. So the federal government's out talking to everybody about what should be in it, how should it work. Local government, UBCM, has some resolutions that says, you know, it should be predictable, it should be long-term, and it should be directed by local government, not by a policy somewhere else.
Close vote this week at the UBCM, Mayor Leonard, on tanker traffic on the coast. I would have thought that would have been a much more decisive vote against tankers, but it nearly a tie, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a wonderful province. You know, there's a lot of resource economies, and there's even some in, you know, us Cappuccino folks in the suburbs of the Lower Mainland and the island, as we're so described. There are many people there that are dependent upon resource economies. You know, there's engineers and scientists and this, that, and the other. So you know, it's a fascinating province. You simply can't take one position and expect it's going to fly the same in Kootenay and Peace River and Prince Rupert. So that kind of dynamic, I think, came to the floor. BC's
most controversial resource, shall we say, BC Bud, was up for a vote too, and a solid vote in the idea that we should basically legalize it.
Yeah, the wording was to decriminalize marijuana, and there was quite a lively debate around it, but it passed. I was chairing that session. At least 70% of the people voted in favor to decriminalize marijuana. It wasn't really even close. So, fascinating.
I wonder if we really could do it if the Americans aren't doing it. I wonder if it wouldn't create a lot of problems at the border.
Well, and that was one of the comments that came up. You know, I can't remember the stats, but, you know, of the 100% of marijuana that's grown, less than 10% is actually consumed in BC. So even if you decriminalized it here, you still got 90% or billions of dollars will illegally be going down south. So that was one of the arguments why even do it. You're still going to have grow-ups, you're still going to have gangs, you're still going to have all of the criminal element associated with it in the trade for cocaine and guns. So you're not going to get rid of that. But that obviously people still thought that we should push for that.
You mentioned, we talked to Frank Leonard about the federal infrastructure program. Premier Christy Clark still hasn't done her address to the convention, and she'll be speaking at the UBCM Friday at 11 o'clock if you're watching us on Thursday night. Is it expected that the provincial government will make some kind of a gesture in the direction of more infrastructure funding?
Well, I'm of the view that we should be grateful to break even right now. You know, so I'm a little bit of a minority with some of my colleagues, but with provincial and federal governments in deficit, I think in a lot of ways we'd be doing well to keep what we got. In terms of the federal infrastructure program, the gas tax, BC government passes it all to municipalities. They don't keep any of it themselves. So we're quite fortunate with that, because there's other provinces in which they take some before they pass it on. The traffic fine revenue, we're getting 100% of that right now. So you'd want to keep that. The small community grant's really important to some small communities around BC. Sometimes a third to almost 50% of their budget comes from a provincial government grant. So there's a lot of things there that, you know, I think a victory is just if she says it's all there. You know, we're not going to, we don't need to reduce it in order to balance our budget. I think you're looking 2014 and beyond in terms of when would there be more money.
Leader of the opposition, Adrian Dix, spoke at the convention this morning, a packed house, a packed media table too. It's one of the, you know, the Leader of the Opposition's talk is usually not a big deal in the past, and no offense to the Leader of the Opposition. But I was pretty impressed with the crowd, with its response. I mean, I guess everybody at the UBCM can read the opinion polls as well.
Yeah, I guess so. And, you know, we're interested going into an election. We know that local government also needs to put out our issues on the table. So to find out what the provincial governments, or what the parties are going to put on there. You know, to Frank's point, are they going to take stuff away? Are they going to add to it? Are they going to bring us to the table? So we're interested. And, you know, in Metro Vancouver, I think we're pleased that he mentioned that TransLink would go back to a mayor's governance structure instead of the private board. So that was something that we've been asking for a while now.
You've got the big Evergreen transit line going out to your community. Have they started construction on it yet?
Yeah, well, they've started a couple minor contracts, moving some utility lines, taking down some buildings, only a few $1 million of contracts. The big contract of who's actually going to design, build it, and operate it still hasn't been let yet, but we're hoping, and I think it's about in 2015 they're suggesting it should be open.
I'm going to ask you, because I have to speak in Washington State next month, and I'm going to get asked what I always get asked, which is when are you folks going to treat your sewage in and around British Columbia's capital? So I'm going to, what's the answer? What do I tell them?
The group that's to look after actual construction is being appointed now. We've been required under the funding, provincial and federal funding, to have a bit of an arm's length body, sort of like a company, run the construction. We were in charge of designing the project, and then they'll be in charge of procurement and seeing it through. So we're moving to that stage. The people are protesting that it's going to happen.
Yes,
it's going to happen.
Up and running by?
I haven't got that in my head, but we're moving to that stage right now. There's still, which, you know, what are you going to do with the sludge, and what are you going to do with this? So I think we have to meet the federal law. It's come down, federal regulations, and a provincial order. So I went well past discussing whether you're going to treat a long time ago. Now we're on the how to. And
if you talk to my neighbors in Victoria, they'll tell you it'll add $3,000 or $4,000 to their annual property taxes. At least if you listen to the level of indignation. And I'm sure people in other parts of British Columbia are really crushed that we're going to have to start treating our sewage in the capital. We got a lot of people, had a lot of questions for municipal leaders, and these two poor municipal leaders are going to have to answer on behalf of every one of British Columbia's 200 municipalities, including all the members of their council. So there's no pressure. Let's start with David Schreck. Here we go.
At the UBCM annual meeting, resolutions frequently come forward that really don't concern municipalities. They concern other levels of government. What's the balance between your lobbying and minding your own shop?
Well, it seems to be a theme in a couple of the clips we've heard so far. You know what? A lot of stuff affects local government even if we don't have the ability to change the legislation. And so local government is usually bringing forward the issues that affect them, because we're the ones at the end of the day that, whether it's a crime and safety issue, a governance, a sewage treatment, we're the ones that have to deal with it. So although we don't have the power to change marijuana laws, we have an opinion on it, and this is the best forum to bring everybody together to voice those opinions.
Do you have a sense over the years that a lot of this is actually pretty effective, that the UBCM raises issues and stuff gets dealt with?
I'm cautious about it. I tend to discourage it even at our own council, because it tends to divide people on provincial issues, and really our municipal issues hardly ever divide us. So sometimes councils, or even amongst cities, they get divided over issues they have no control over. And I tend not to, I don't think that's productive in terms of the relationship. But looking at a larger view over the years, it is a way of kind of seeing how the wind's blowing. And I think probably provincial politicians, if they were to admit it, sometimes would go, oh, I didn't know that would carry, or I didn't know that'd be close. So it's a you know, if you bring what is there, 1,400 people together that have all been elected. I mean, it's quite a, you know, what do you call those sample groups that people put together? Focus group. It's a huge focus group to test some of these issues. So I think there is some value to it.
You make an interesting point. I think if you just look at what happened this week, that you know, 70% of the people voting on decriminalization of marijuana probably reflects public opinion in British Columbia, and you go, well, you know, that's the way we're headed. I was surprised it was so close on tanker traffic, but it may be also a reminder that there's a big chunk of the province that still looks at the resource industry and would like to figure out some way to have tankers and pipelines without destroying the environment.
Or they may have children that are involved in the industry. Yeah. You know, they may be retired here, but they've got children and grandchildren working in the resource sector. So it's you can't assume where the votes are.
Bill Tillman with a question for the two mayors. Here's Bill.
This is the perennial question facing local politicians. It's often said that municipalities are the closest to the voters, have the most connection to voters, and yet overall they have the lowest turnouts. Why is that?
Everyone's perfectly happy with their local government.
It's tough. You know, I've worked through 10 elections trying to get people out to vote, and so it's not for lack of trying. I think, you know, it takes a political science to maybe explain it. I don't know that I can explain it, but certainly at our level, going door to door and campaign to campaign and brochure to brochure, we're doing everything we can to try and get people out to vote. Now there's initiatives to change the elections and internet voting or however it may be, and we're all trying different things. I think Burnaby's even going to malls with polling stations. So we're all going to try something new. But it is disappointing. You can tell when you're knocking on a door when you come across people that aren't going to vote, have never voted, and you just kind of feel sad that people elsewhere in the world would fight so hard to get the vote.
Two things I wonder about. Is it because the news media pay a lot more attention to provincial and federal elections? And is the thing that you notice that turnout jumps when something's happened to really anger your electorate?
Well, in Port Coquitlam, when we had a really good mayor's race, we went up to around 30% voter turnout. The previous time was around 20%. So, you know, that created some more energy, so it got more newspaper. I think there's some other things, you know, provincial and federal elections, you get a voter card, right? Tells you where to vote. Tells you have to go to that poll during this time. Municipalities generally don't do that. We don't have to send it out. We put it in the newspaper. We vote on Saturdays and not on Tuesdays. Maybe there's something there where people are busy taking their families. And we don't spend as much money as candidates on our campaigns as provincial government. So in Port Coquitlam, we're equivalent size to an MLA's riding or a provincial riding. I spend $30,000 on my campaign. My opponent spent probably half that amount. $68,000 each MLA candidate can spend, and you know the two or three will spend at least that amount. So they're spending a lot more. There's more literature going to the door. So I think all of those things pay a piece to the puzzle, but I don't think there's one thing that really is the cause.
You mentioned in passing the election law, and I know there was a little bit of talk about changing the local government election laws this week. Here is from the Tyee, Andrew McLeod of the Tyee.
In 2010, there was a report from a joint committee of the UBCM and the provincial government aimed at reforming the Local Government Act to change how municipal elections happen. It was aimed at doing things like stopping anonymous donations and putting spending limits in place. Altogether, there were 31 recommendations. They were not put in place for the 2011 election, though they had been promised to be. And it's been said that they're going to be put in place for the 2014 election. I'm wondering how hopeful you are or aren't that that is the case.
And I heard the minister in charge of community development say in his speech on Wednesday that maybe the bill might be put through in time for the 2014 election. So it's still up in the air.
And he was the minister when it started.
Yes.
He was co-chair of the committee along, I think, with Robert Hobson from Kelowna. The two of them were co-chairs. I mean, I'll work by whatever the rules are. So in some ways, I don't feel comfortable trying to design the rules of election I'm going to run in. So the sooner they figure out what the rules are, then by 2014, fair game. It was a bit confusing approaching 2011, not knowing what the rules were going to be. But once they're adopted, I've got no problem with it.
It's not a little measure. The minister said the draft legislation is already 140 pages, I think. You know.
Not like making it easy. They did change one thing, though. The municipal election is going to bump forward a month. So it was the third Saturday of November, and now it's going to be the third Saturday of October. And that was partially because there was a lot of comments, especially from more retirement communities. People are going down south and they leave in October, beginning of November, so they weren't around. And, you know, just going out door knocking. You know, for females and in your rural areas, going out at night when it's dark at 4 o'clock is kind of intimidating. So it might give advantage to maybe males who I don't mind going door knocking at 8 o'clock on a November night that's raining, whereas it's not as safe for other people.
And you won't be mistaken for people being out early for Halloween.
And our election signs will make it through Halloween, whereas they didn't before.
Okay, what do we got? We did a show earlier this year on government spending and local government spending, among other things, and raised some issues. So this is a chance for some of the local leaders to get a little bit back and give their side of the story. Let's start with a question from BC Business Council, Jock Finlayson. Here's Jock.
The Business Council completed a study earlier this year which showed municipal operating spending in Metro Vancouver among all the municipalities added together has increased about 2.5 to 3 times faster than provincial government operating spending in the past 10 years. The picture varies a lot by individual city, but that's the overall number. How do you explain the fact that spending at the municipal level has increased so much faster on a per person basis than in the provincial jurisdiction?
We've been hearing a lot of this the last couple of years.
Yeah, so, you know, I could say for Coquitlam we haven't, and we at Jock's study we were at the bottom, but generally speaking, there's a lot of downloading and these sort of things, and I know that's a typical statement out of a local politician, but, you know, the federal government demanded that we put cameras in all jail cells. We pay for it. They want to put rifles in all RCMP cars. Makes no sense to put a rifle in an urban RCMP car, but we got to put them in there. There's $10,000 a car. Sewage treatment upgrades that have to occur. They make a change about regulation and policy. We have to pay for it. So there's a lot of those things that are going on, and a lot of the challenge with these studies that BCBC did and the CFIB, they just looked at spending, but they didn't look how we were getting the revenue to pay for that spending. So over time, our dependency on property tax has actually decreased, and our user fees and other fees that are more associated with the revenue we're collecting is going up. So it wouldn't look at, you know, we hired 3 more bylaw officers that actually produced positive revenue because they're handing out more tickets, or we expanded our rec center programs, drove more revenue from that, and therefore drove some operating costs, but maybe it cut each other out. So it wasn't looking at the complete picture of a budget, just looking at operating spending.
What's I know you're not Metro Vancouver, but you've heard these complaints as well on the island. What do you think?
Well, my response when they come and visit me is I'm doing exactly what I promised in the campaign. So I think that's fair. So I went around to all the all-candidates meetings, and every year when I have a community group to speak to, I give the same message. We're going to protect funding of public safety, police and fire. We'll restrain other departments, and we're going to aggressively increase our spending on infrastructure. And therefore, we have the increase in the budget and the increase in taxation. And I feel so long as, you know, you're open about it, you promise it before the election, and you do it after the election, I've got a deal.
And you face the voters every 3 years.
Yeah.
You had a bit of a fight last time, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. But we were both on the same
had.
page on fiscal issues, so
Yeah.
that was, you know, we were both going to protect police and fire and spend on infrastructure.
I sort of have to think, too, if people were really ticked off, the voter turnout would be higher, but that's just me. However, other people disagree and raise issues, and let's get this one in before we take the break, and then we can deal with it after. Canadian Taxpayers Federation, the friend of every local government in Canada, Jordan Bateman. Here he is.
After following the province's example in 2007 and giving public sector unions huge raises in order to have labor peace through the Olympics, why aren't cities following the province this time and demanding 2 years of net zero from their civic unions?
What did your people get this year?
Well, some haven't settled, but we've been around inflation. Not like the province at zero.
Net zero.
No. We've negotiated openly and fairly at the table and settled around inflationary figures with the QP. The police settlements, you have RCMP. I guess municipal, you know, there's ones that were waiting to happen. They tend to roll east to west. We've settled with firefighters around inflationary figures. So it's we weren't mandated to go net zero. It would take I think it would take legislation to achieve net zero at the table, or else chaos. So we, as an employer, have negotiated in good faith with our employees.
The minister, Bill Bennett, just threw that into his speech on Wednesday and said local government should follow the provincial lead and basically hold the line on raises.
Well, there's only one local government in Metro Vancouver that's settled, and that's New Westminster. The rest of us are still negotiating. So I don't think it's fair to paint everybody with the same brush, but at the same time, we're negotiating in good faith. If you look at CUPE over the last 30 years, their wages have gone up to rate of inflation, with the exception of the last 5-year deal. And that 5-year deal threw them out of whack in the positive side a little bit more. And it, you know, as Jordan said, we signed it in 2007, and you can't predict, and you're not going to break a contract just because the economy fails. And we had to make tough choices at local government to reduce some services so that we can continue to afford to pay those, even though they were going up. So who knows where it goes? And I'm not sure if the provincial government has had a net zero on every contract they've signed or every contract they're negotiating, from what I understand as well. So I don't, you know.
And we did those long-term deals because we wanted peace through the Olympics, and we got it. And with that, we will take a brief break on Voice of BC. Stay with us.
One of the most important topics at this year's UBCM will be public transit. There's been an audit of TransLink, an audit of BC Transit, and mayors and councillors across the province are very concerned about the way it's being funded and the lack of services. I expect the provincial government will come under some significant heat on this topic.
Our roads aren't the only thing gridlocked. Cities claim they're underfunded by the province. The provincial government says cities are overspending. Meanwhile, taxpayers clutch their wallets and wonder, when will the thousands of dollars we pay in taxes to these different levels of government finally be enough?
So, welcome back to Voice of BC, and one of the two mayors here was reminding me during the first break that Jordan Bateman used to be a councillor, right? He was on council, what, Langley Township?
District of Langley, yeah.
District of Langley, yeah.
Never
He was a line guy then?
Never voted against a budget. So, you know, wanted to
But
build
he's in
more
a
roads.
different group now, you know?
Fair
He's
enough.
got a job. Let's go to Phil Hochstein with a question on pay equity. Here's Phil.
Municipal workers make 30 to 40% more in compensation than private sector workers doing the same work. For example, a lifeguard at a municipal pool makes $23 an hour, where a lifeguard at a private water slide park makes $13 to $15 an hour. 70% of British Columbians think this compensation inequity is unfair, according to a recent poll by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My question to you is this: are you prepared to support legislation that would end this compensation inequity between municipal workers and private sector workers that pay those taxes?
The provincial government would have to impose this by legislation, right? It's not...
Well, they would force us to break collective agreements that we've negotiated in good faith over many years. And so I'm not sure how anybody would propose to do that. That's...
Or for the future, bring in some kind of wage controls at the local level.
But you'd still have to have a two-tier system. If our lifeguard is paid $20 an hour and we're forced to pay them $13, there's, you know, a constructive dismissal clause that would come with that in a heartbeat.
What do you think?
Well, I believe in free collective bargaining, and our employees and the employer bargain freely and come to these agreements. Sometimes it's because of pay equity within our employment group with 1,500 employees, men and women, and different tasks as well. And one needs to think in terms of recreation. It's easy to pick on recreation, but those folks don't often get a lot of hours. They're not full-time career positions in many cases. Sometimes they're getting 2 hours here and 2 hours there, and away they go. So I think you have to be careful about that. Certainly, when we're competing, and we're competing for engineers or planners or directors of finance, we're competing with the private sector, and we're in the same ballpark because we have applicants from private and public sector. So I think the recreation ones is a little bit not as accurate as the other parts of our full-time employees.
Tax room. You hear about it, talk about it. What does it actually mean? Question about it. Former finance minister again, Paul Ramsey. Here he is.
One of the ongoing concerns in municipalities, at least as expressed at the UBCM, is they want more broad-based ability to tax. Well, they really want that ability, but they don't want to actually use it. Their broad-based ability to tax has been expanded, but mayors and councillors have decided they really don't want to use it. What they really want to do is ask for more money from the provincial government.
Fair question?
Well, certainly in Metro
You're going
Vancouver,
no.
yeah.
You start,
well,
you start and then we'll go.
Well, they were given a menu of taxes, but they weren't given the trigger to use them. It still requires provincial approval for transit and transportation. So I think that's a bit unfair. We certainly don't have new tax sources. And I wouldn't advocate for them in these economic times anyway. There's only one taxpayer. We're having to get by with what we got now. And we're restraining, like I say, all departments except public safety are being restrained. It'll be the third year with a 1% cut. So I think that's not as accurate as being described there. I think particularly in Metro, there's a talk about new taxes, but the triggers haven't been given to local government.
So yes, TransLink has got a serious funding gap and still does, both on the operating and the capital side. There are options, but they still need provincial approval.
Well, they do, and we're not afraid. You know, Paul said that we don't want to make those decisions. Well, back in September, 2 months before a municipal election, we voted to increase gas tax by 2 cents. Nobody got unelected or kicked out of office because they made that decision, because it was a good decision to help fund the system or keep the system where it is.
There's still a gap, though, isn't there?
Oh, there's a huge gap. Huge gap, and I might differ with Frank here. I think don't give us grants anymore. Don't give us infrastructure grants. Give us the ability to fund our own services. But as long as you got property tax and that's all you've got, you're more. We had a session at UBCM on Monday, and we brought in Professor Harry Kitchen, who's a very well-known local tax person, and he said you're more responsible for the money that you need to raise. You get a grant, you're not as responsible for it because you didn't have to put up your hand to raise the money. But if you're raising property taxes, or like they have in Washington State, a sales tax, or you look at other places, they're more responsible for the money they bring in. You're going to look at efficiencies and how you deliver that. And I think that's where we need to go with the system.
Is it your feeling that the property tax has kind of reached its limit and you need some other options? Sales tax, gas tax, there's been talk of charges on cars. Road pricing has been talked about. Is that sort of the way people are thinking?
That's where we're thinking at TransLink, is the road pricing, the car levy, tolling, as a way not only to raise money, but to shape people's patterns on how they drive. So if there's a road pricing system, they might think differently about taking the roads as frequently as they do, because now they're being charged, and maybe they want to take transit, maybe they want to get a job closer to home, maybe they don't want to move out into the valley, they'd rather live closer, and the money that they're going to save in a house out there, they can actually save because they're not driving as much. So it's as much about raising revenue as it is delivering a complete transportation system.
Tom Fletcher, black press, but in the press gallery we call him Mr. President, because he's the president of the press gallery. And that's not the only reason I'm running a question from him, but that's one of the reasons. Tom Fletcher.
The Union of BC Municipalities has asked for a role in the province's review of its taxation. Do you expect the province to intervene in business and industrial tax rates, which have been criticized heavily in the past?
Yeah, they grumbled about it. What do you think?
Well, the expert panel came down in basically with our position that we're not out of line. So I thought that was significant. The ports were dealt with some years ago, and there was a fear perhaps that there was going to be a provincial cap or meddling on our variable mill rate, and the expert panel didn't go that way. So I think our position's been defended.
What we're talking about is that the tax rate varies, variable, for industrial property, business, and there was an issue with the port, which was dealt with, and that the rate is different. The industrial property is taxed at higher, and that it was affecting particularly the resource industries, but also business and economic growth. You don't expect to see a change on that?
Well, the expert panel came out and said that residential taxes in British Columbia are lower than the other provinces, the other 4 big provinces anyways. And the gap between residential and business is about the same in all the provinces. We're not an anomaly. So that's why they didn't go there to say you need to cap them. We did a study, UBCM, there was also independent studies that were done that shows that property tax is not a deterrent for business location or business success. It does become an issue though when a business needs to reinvest a large capital amount or they're in financial challenges. And as you talked about, that's usually in the resource area. They got to rebuild their mill, and now they have a choice whether they rebuild it here or rebuild it over there, and then that becomes a factor at that point. But it doesn't in the decision point up to them.
I love this question. Jock Finlayson, I'm just going to let this one go. Here's Jock.
Greater Vancouver and the capital region together have a population of less than 3 million people. Those two urban areas are divided up into more than 30 individual municipalities. If one looks across the rest of Canada, we see that most large urban areas are organized into 1 or 2 or 3 cities encompassing populations of 800,000, a million, or 2 million or more. Why do we need so many individual municipalities in our urban areas when the rest of the country seems to function quite well with far fewer?
Why do we need 2 Coquitlams? Why do we need 3 Sanniches, I ask you?
Well, I'm not sure if the Ontario models worked well. The cost of service went up, taxes went up, you're not connected with your local government anymore. There was a study that was done that looked at amalgamated cities in the US. So they looked at the last 15 amalgamated cities, because they even have more. You look at the Twin Cities, there's 140 municipalities for 3 million people. When they looked at the last 15 amalgamated cities, their taxes were 54% higher than the other local governments in that same state. So there's study after study that shows your taxes actually go up after you do it, and your service level or quality and not connection actually goes down. And I think we look at regional districts, Metro Vancouver, we have amalgamated water, sewer, garbage, some park systems, air quality, that really expensive stuff. We've already amalgamated them, and we're doing a really good job in delivering those in a cost-effective manner.
I live in Fairfield. I'm not sure I like the fact that we're amalgamated with Victoria, but that's just
There
me.
you are. Well, there's North Sannich, Central Sannich, Sannich, and we refer to Victoria as South Sannich. So, if I were to start over again, I wouldn't create 13 municipalities here. But to start over, to start over, you got to go back over 100 years. Yeah. In the Western communities, I was chair of the regional district when those municipalities were being created, and I actually went on record opposed to so many being created. I thought there was an opportunity there to start fresh. So your Langford, Colwood, perhaps your Royal could have been quite a powerhouse. It could have been someday like a Surrey. But the government at the time created all these municipalities. So my role there, therefore, dealing with that reality is to always work on integration. And we're always looking to work with our neighbors and integrate, because that's the landscape we have to work with.
Yeah, although you do hear like the grumbling. I mean, look at the Victoria-Esquimalt police sharing arrangement. If you only have to look every time you look in the papers here, either Victoria or Esquimalt is grumbling about some aspect of it that they don't think worked very well.
And I don't have an argument with Esquimalt on that. But when they put it out for bids, we didn't bid on being their provider of policing because it was just such a complicated situation. Like I say, but you're going back with institutions that are over 100 years old.
And people are awfully attached to their local community. Nothing might stir Oak Bay as much as the idea that they were going to be merged with Victoria, I would like to think. And this is a municipality that on occasion has supplied Victoria with its mayors, not that they lived in Victoria. Anyway, enough of this. Let's go on. This is a specific amalgamation question and a different one involving policing, and here is Jordan Bateman.
Many watchers believe that the Missing Women's Inquiry may recommend enhanced regional policing as part of its findings, something that municipal leaders generally bristle at. But given the fact that crime knows no borders and that we're trying to find more efficiencies in policing, is it time to have a serious conversation, especially in the Lower Mainland, about regional police?
This is something they have done in other provinces.
I agree with Jordan. I don't know if I thought I'd ever say that now that he's doing what he's doing, but I think it is time that we have a serious conversation. I think actually we should have the serious conversation before the RCMP contract was signed. However, there still is a 2-year opt-out clause on that. And there are local governments that are looking at leaving the RCMP. There's 5 local governments in the Metro Vancouver area that are doing a study on what it would look like to do a municipal police compared to their RCMP services. And some of them are looking at what neighboring, like Richmond, for example, they neighbor with Vancouver and Delta and New West, all have city police. Is their ability to merge some of those together? So I think that is about time we have a serious conversation on it.
And I guess there's a debate here too in and around the capital region about coordination of forces.
There always has been. We have a municipal police force. I think we would resist very much RCMP. We feel it reflects our community needs. But there is a need to do even more integration than there is now in terms of regional units. We're about to join the Vancouver Island Major Crime Unit. the RCMP, it's very hard to pin them down on the cost of anything right now. And I would like some certainty about costs if you're going to turn your major crimes over to a regional unit. But we're going to join. We're a member of every other regional unit that already exists here, and I think that's where we can really make a difference. But the frontline patrol, community policing that we do with our own department is very well received and quite cherished by the people we serve.
Oh, this one. This issue fascinates me because every time I get into open line radio in Vancouver and the question of tolling the Port Mann Bridge comes up, we go round and round and round over what would be fairer than tolling the bridge, and every single caller who has a different idea for how to handle the tolls is followed by somebody who says, no, that's not fair, this would be fair. And most concepts of fairness involve somebody else paying the toll, I would say, but I would feel that way too. So here we go with a question on tolling, and we'll see how far we get on this before the break, and we might have to take it up afterward. Bill Tillman on tolling.
Mayor Moore, the new Port Mann Bridge is very important to your municipality of Port Coquitlam, and we've seen the toll come from $3 a trip down to $1.50 a trip as a discount. What do you think is the right fare, and what do you think about tolling other bridges which are already built?
Well, it doesn't affect my municipality too much, but it does affect all of us in the Lower Mainland. I think we need to look at a broader base to it. I think we need to look at a road pricing strategy that would look at the bridges and other major corridors, again, to shape the system as much to raise revenue to pay for the system. The one thing that I really don't like about the new tolling strategy that they've come out with, it doesn't coordinate itself with the Golden Ears Bridge. One's run by TransLink, one's by the provincial government, two separate brands, two separate transponders. They do cross-work with each other, but it's still a confusion. The one thing I don't like about the Port Mann is they've capped it. So you could buy, not capped it, but you could buy a monthly pass. So that's just going to be a cost of living in the valley, $75 a month just to live in the valley, instead of saying, well, if you use it 1,000 times, you should be charged 1,000 times. That would then deter people from maybe using it as much and then living closer to where they work or where their business is.
And the thing with the rise, you mentioned transponders, with the rise of the ability to have electronic sensors and computerized counting and collection, we're able to, it's possible to just toll all the roads in and out of the city, or to toll off-ramps or some parts of the road and all that. The notion that I keep hearing, though, is that you mentioned the Golden Ears Bridge, the Port Mann Bridge. The great concern I hear is that it'll shift traffic to the crossings that aren't tolled. New Westminster's not happy about the Patello Bridge. And also the whole question of why not have everybody coming in and out of the city pay some kind of a charge, but a smaller charge than, after all, $3 each way, that's $30 a week. That can start to add up.
I agree. Well, I think we need to look at it as a complete system. And that's our challenge that we have. We have TransLink major road network. We have the provincial highway system. We have some local roads that have some very big corridors and bridges that we look after. But unless you look at it as a complete system, then you're going to have this piecemeal deal. So, you know, we told TransLink Golden Ears, number one, Port Mann, provincial government. Patello, they're going to replace TransLink. So, you know, how far are we going to shift people down that side of the river before they get to the Alex Fraser to cross for free? And that doesn't seem to make sense for Surrey. Now you're going to have rut running all through Surrey to try to find the free alternative.
The transit system in the capital region was an audit, I think, released this week. Everything going to go along okay there, or you got some of the same issues?
I'm still pouting. we tried to, there's about 40 communities around BC that we stirred up quite a little rebellion about dealing with the Crown Corporation and BC Transit, and
most of us didn't even know it existed.
No, but it's really frustrating to have such a key service, and one that's going to be so important in decades to come, transit and transportation, in the hands of a Crown Corporation, with local control just simply being a few folks appointed by a cabinet minister into a commission. And so some of us have been working really hard to get local control of transit, local, regional control of transit.
So the same Crown Corporation that handles the provincial capital runs the transit system in Prince George?
Nanaimo, Prince George, Quesnel. So it's out of date. It's almost feudal, you know, that ordering council shall pick 7 people from the capital region to be on a commission. I mean, I've been one of them forever, so I mean, maybe, you know, I'm shooting myself in the foot here, but it's not democratic. It's not doesn't represent everybody who's paying taxes, and it's not going to achieve what we want decades from now, which is an integrated regional transportation system linked to planning and land use.
And I assume that the report didn't say any of this.
No, we came that close. But, you know, the ministers changed from Blair Leckstrom to Mary Polak just recently. We at the worst possible time when the independent panel report came down. And she took a position that was pretty much neutral.
We will take a brief break on Voice of BC with the 2 mayors. We'll be back. Stay with us.
I think there's a lot of potential for local governments and First Nations to work together, and it would be in economic development. You know, what is the vision we see for our area? How can we work together? How can we help one another?
There are more ways to connect with us at Voice of BC. Follow us on Twitter at Voice of BC. Send us an email to vobc@shaw.ca or write to us at 111 1925 Blanchard Street, Victoria, BC, V8T 4J2.
I think now it's almost as if it's non-existent. There doesn't seem to be a relationship that you can characterize, and I think we need to do some work around what is the appropriate level of a relationship between local government and the province and get back to some meaningful dialogue on that.
And welcome back to Voice of BC. And when we went away, we were talking about the eccentric arrangement for handling transit systems around the province, with the exception of the Lower Mainland, which is they're all run through this Crown Corporation called BC Transit. It needs fixing. I assume, Mayor Moore, if somebody came to you and said, why don't we go to the TransLink model, you might not necessarily recommend that?
No, they'd probably be sorry that they asked. It would take me so long to explain. But, you know, the mayors, we're a mayor's council. We have 2 jobs. We appoint the board based on recommendations that come to us. So, and we get to approve supplementary budgets. Supplementary budgets means cost increases, so increase in service, but how you're going to pay for them. We don't get to decide the operating budget. And as we just learned, we approved a supplementary budget, as I talked about with that 2-cent gas tax increase.
Yes.
Their revenues went down in many different areas, and they took the supplementary money that we gave them and put it back into other operations. So we didn't even get what we kind of bought back in September. So it's just, it's just awful. It's so disconnected from our local needs.
You started all this trouble. How would you organize it if you could?
Well, where TransLink was when it was first designed, where Metro Vancouver Board, in those days it was still called Greater Vancouver Regional District, but it was locally elected officials would represent their citizens and control the transit and transportation system. So TransLink at the start in the design of it, I think, was fairly valid. It went sideways when, 2007, 2008, when they decided to go with a private board, take it away from the regional district, go with a mayor's council. Then all of a sudden you had different pieces that really didn't have direct control and authority, nor were they elected and represent the people they serve.
You think the tolling debate is controversial. TransLink organizational models, of which there have been 3, I think, in the time I've been doing this. And who knows, we may see another one if there's a change of government. This is a good question from Bernard von Schulman. The big city issues sometimes dominate for obvious reasons, but there's a lot of rural challenges as well. Here's Bernard.
Many forestry-dependent communities in British Columbia rely on property taxes of the forest industry, sawmills, paper mills, etc. What we have now is some communities that are having so many problems with property taxes that they're having to consider fire sales of municipal properties to be able to meet their needs. Such as an example is Prince Rupert is desperately trying to find what things does the city own so they can sell them to build their new emergency services building.
Having a lot of smaller municipalities, is it good? I mean, the dialogue around that good and constructive?
And the UBCM works hard to make sure their executive represents all regions of the province and all size of communities. But certainly, and for that reason, I think the executives always has been aware of the struggles of small communities. And I'm aware of it at the Municipal Finance Authority, where we issue their bonds and debt, particularly for Rupert. We've been through some very tough times. So we're as strong as our weakest link. And we do work hard to make sure that policy is appropriate for all of our membership.
You mentioned the Municipal Finance Authority, which I was at their anniversary meeting a while ago. And this is a fascinating organization created by W.C. Bennett, right? And I don't think it's ever had a default, and it's got many years had a better credit rating than the province, right?
We just went to market today. I was going to announce it tomorrow, so you can have it first. We're the first time under 3% for a 10-year bond, so we're lower than most provinces. We were in the market today for 2.85%. It's because we got 3 AAA credit ratings. Never had a default. We guarantee each other's debt, and we're very conservative, small c conservative, financially. Our communities around BC are actually, despite, the Taxpayers Federation or what, their books are in great shape. Their reserves exceed debt. They pay as you go for most of their services. So that's, you got me started. We're in great shape.
Go ahead. Talk a little bit about rural BC, even coming from POCO.
Well, and as Frank said, with UBCM, that's the best part about it. It brings all of those issues together. And we have seen an increase from the provincial government in unconditional grants to rural BC from 50 billion to 150 billion. So that's helping them out a lot. But I think, we're all struggling with infrastructure costs, with upgrades to sewage treatment facilities. And one of the things that's interesting is the numbers in Metro Vancouver are bigger. Right, we got more zeros behind them, but the effects on the property taxpayer is almost the same. It's just as great in North Van when we have to build a new sewage treatment facility. It's a $400 million facility, but their taxes, potentially, their sewer taxes will go from $186 a year to $1,300 a year if we get no provincial and federal support. Same with rural BC. So when we come together, we're stronger as a voice to help lobby for some of this infrastructure funding.
We've got a little bit of time left and a few more questions. Interesting one here from one of the members from Victoria about curbside recycling. Rob Fleming, here he is.
One of the flashpoints anticipated at this year's UBCM convention is around the expansion of producer responsibility for print and packaging materials. This could revolutionize how curbside recycling is done in British Columbia. A lot of large municipalities as well as rural municipalities are pushing back against the government. This is already in law. The regulations have been changed. It's coming down the track. How do you as mayors believe that you could best resolve this difference of opinion or concerns that you have with the provincial government?
I missed this one completely when they did it.
Well, they've got an extended producer or EPR program for many different things: tires, paint, electronics, and this is a big one. This, British Columbia for the last 20 years has led the way on EPR programs, and this is a big one.
EPR?
Extended producer responsibility. So the producer has to pay for the recycling of the product, and so they have to collect a fee. They have to figure out how to collect it. This one's big. It's all your printed paper and packaging. So you think everything that's basically goes in your blue bin now has to be treated by the private sector. There is some concern, so that's a good thing. It's going to take more stuff out of the landfill. It theoretically will save us money, so that's a good thing. But the concern is if we have contracts in place for recycling contracts already, or we do it with like in Port Coquitlam, we have our own capital, our own staff that does it. What happens if they come in and say they're going to do it? Well, we have to lay people off. What will we do with these, millions of dollars of trucks that we have? So there is some concern there, but I was at hosting a session today with Minister Lake and the Multi-Materials BC, which is the new stewardship organization that's going to conduct this, and they're very open to the discussion to figure out how we do this together.
I work for a printed material. I keep wondering how it's going to affect me.
UBCM is doing great work on this. We'll work it out. We always do. And I brought in the blue box in the capital region in '89, and people thought it wouldn't work, and they were going to put their used car parts in it instead of recyclables. But it's been a great success. A lot of us are adding kitchen waste at the curb. You might have it. We're about to add it. So I think the nice thing about local government is that the politics goes out the window when there's a file and you can work it from start to finish and end up with a happy ending. And we deliver on those sorts of things. That's a great thing about being in local government.
Oh, they're going to love this one. This is probably the favorite move that the government's taken in the last year. Nice of Jane Sturck, former local councillor, now leader of the Green Party, to raise it. Here is Jane Sturck.
The description of the Municipal Auditor General suggests that this government has concerns about local government's ability to do the job well, and somehow implies that they need advice from an outsider. What do you think of the Municipal Auditor General's role?
The provincial legislature was recently soundly clouted on both ears by the Provincial Auditor General for ignoring his warning letters for 5 years on its own accounts. Nevertheless, the legislature in its wisdom imposed an Auditor General on the municipalities. Do either of you find that ironic?
It's a little ironic, but you know, we balance our books. We're not allowed to run a deficit. We can go into debt, as Frank talked about, and we get audited every year on our financials. Now, a lot of us don't do performance audits. Some of us are starting to bring those in. So at the end of the day, UBCM tried to work hard to, well, they opposed it last year at the convention, but if it was going in, we wanted to be a part of it, and that didn't work out too well either. So we'll have to see how it goes. But, you know, at the end of the day, if I can learn something to do something more efficiently from Sannich or somewhere else, that's a good thing. And I shouldn't be embarrassed that, you know, we aren't doing it as good as someone else, because we can learn.
What do you think?
I was in favor of it. I was in the minority amongst my colleagues, but I have no problem with it. Come in and look at the books. It's not my money, it's the taxpayers' money. Yeah. Come take a look. In the corporate world, you have external auditors just for that reason. You want an independent set of eyes to look at the books. So,
where does the process stand at the moment?
The person's been hired. There's a panel that's basically the governance body of it, and I guess they got to staff up and hit the road.
Judith Sayers, we saw her before one of the breaks a little earlier. Question about First Nations and local government. Here's Judith.
I was wondering, in light of the big issues that have been raised around Musqueam and the human remains at the end of Granville Street, what efforts has UBCM been making to work with First Nations over such key issues? How are you working with the province and First Nations to help resolve some of those issues that stop development within the local governments?
To me, this is one of the big changes that's occurred between governments with First Nations in the time I've been doing this job. So I assume have you got processes in place?
Yeah, community forums, and some of our member municipalities have direct relationships with their neighbors, and now at regional boards there's representation coming from First Nations once they've had new treaties done up. So the evolution in the past 20 years is incredible. It's what I've seen in terms of the relationship, and it's going to continue to get better.
Any First Nations sought direct membership in the UBCM?
Yeah, we have 6 First Nations that are direct members of UBCM, and in fact 2 years ago Harry Neese, the chief from up north, he was the UBCM president.
That's right, I'd forgotten that. Municipal water supplies, we want to get this one in before we run out of time. Ben Parfit, here he is.
One of the biggest costs that municipal governments face is to provide enough clean drinking water for their constituents. We know that one of the ways to control costs and keep expenditures down is to control events on the lands surrounding community water supplies. Yet much of the decision-making around those lands is in the provincial government's purview. I'm wondering, in your opinion, if it makes sense to be moving control of watershed lands over to community and regional governments, and if so, what that might look like here in British Columbia.
This come up this year?
It did, and Frank might be better to talk about it because in Metro Vancouver we own our watersheds. So the North Shore Mountains, there's 3 watersheds there. Metro Vancouver owns them. They're closed. No one goes in there unless we escort them through it. So we're actually in that spot already, and it helps us greatly in delivering clean water.
We're the same way. In the Capital Region, we own our watershed and we own a spare. We have a second one for growth someday. But in the small communities, and Greg and I have heard this at UBCM meetings, the population's not large enough to support owning their own watershed. So therefore, they're always dealing with Crown and struggles over use. It would be a good file for a provincial government someday to take a run at and solve, because it's imperfect now.
Bob Simpson, independent member of the legislature, saw him a little earlier too. Just sort of a reflective question here, and this maybe is where we'll end the show with the answer to this one. Here's Bob.
Often we have local government representatives coming into the provincial legislature as MLAs, often as cabinet ministers, and yet they seem to forget what it's like at the council level. What would you like to see the provincial government do to change the relationship it has with UBCM and with local government? What are the specific steps you believe are necessary to have a productive, proactive relationship between those two levels of government?
What do you think?
Well, maybe people remember the exceptions. In my case, Bill 75, which was an override legislation of local government by the province, was a big fight. But that's the exception. The relationship we've had with MLAs, particularly those that have come from local government, have been first class on both sides of the House. You know, we had Rob Fleming on, who was a Victoria councillor, Maureen Carriganis in this area here, of course, Murray Cole, Ida Chong, and away we go. And I found it's always been useful to give them a nudge and say, well, you remember what it was like. And they do. So I think we do have our flashpoints. It's usually on policy, and they're the exceptions. On both sides of the House, I've always had a good relationship with MLAs.
Bit of time left for your answer, Mayor Moore. What do you think?
Well, I agree. It's all about the relationship that you can create. But I think if there was, you know, we talk about finance a lot and infrastructure, and I think if we could jointly come together on an expert panel to look at how we do that together, we might appreciate each other's side of the story better.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. Thank you, Mayor Moore. Thank you for giving us the local government perspective on Voice of BC. Thanks for watching Voice of BC, bringing the legislature and BC politics into your living room. Good night.
Accommodations for some guests of Voice of BC is provided by the Victoria Regent Waterfront Hotel and Suites, overlooking downtown Victoria's Inner Harbour.